and now I feel like I should stand back up here, but I'm just going to sit down again. But yeah, now we're going to move on to the panel debate, which is going to be on delivering seamless logistics through technology. And if I can invite our panelists to join me on the stage, please. We have Tom Parker, who's the head of on-the-road strategy and policy at Amazon Last Mile. We have Grace Rawnsley, who is the Director of Sustainability and Net Zero Transition at the Port of London Authority. And we have Farsi Al-Haq, the Innovation Manager, Data, AI and Quantum from the Port of Tyne, and David Boot, who is the Director of Public Affairs and Policy at the Road Haulage Association. So thank you, panellists, for joining me. So what we're going to do, I'm going to ask all the panellists to introduce themselves, just take a couple of minutes to introduce yourselves and perhaps a perspective on the topic. Then I have some questions that I am going to ask as the chair's prerogative, but then there will be a chance for everyone in the room to ask questions as well. Does that sound okay to everyone? Okie doke. Right, I am going to start with David, because you're next to me, so you can introduce yourself first.
Hi everyone, I'm David Boot. I'm Director of Public Affairs and Policy at the Road Haulage Association. For those of you who don't know about the RHA, we are a trade association for the road transport sector. That includes HGVs, that includes vans, that includes coach members as well. I guess thinking about this topic, one thing I would say as an opening comment is that it's a tough industry out there for those in the road transport sector. Margins are very tight, so traditionally we're looking at 2% profit margins. So when it comes to thinking about the use of technology, it's not just a nice to have, it's an essential part of the industry and how the industry will progress in the future. But I will end it there, but looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, David. Grace?
Hi, I'm Grace Rawnsley. I'm the Director of Sustainability for the Port of London Authority. The Port of London Authority and the Port of London is the UK's largest port by cargo volume. And we're situated on the Thames, which is also an incredibly important cultural space as well. And as the Port of London Authority ourselves, we are the navigational authority for that river. We don't own or operate any of the cargo terminals, but we oversee about 70 different terminal operations on the river. So it's an incredibly busy place. And technology and sustainability are really much at the heart of how we are doing that. So again, I'll leave it there without giving away too many secrets.
Thanks, Grace. Farsi?
Hi, I'm Farsi Al-Haq. I am the Innovation Manager for Data, AI and Quantum at the Port of Tyne. I look at all the different emerging digital technologies that are out there and how can they be employed within the wider maritime sector and then more specifically within ports as well. I think just in general, ports sit in the middle of the supply chain where the interface between sea-based transport and the land-based operations. So it's quite an interesting challenge, this driving seamless logistics through the use of technology. And yeah, we'll just discuss some of the initiatives and projects that we've been working on at Tyne as well.
And Tom.
Thank you very much. So I'm Tom Parker. I lead the European Transport Strategy and Policy team in Amazon Logistics, which is our last mile function. So I lead a team of 8 across Europe with in-country specialists, and our sort of core focus is delivering strategic sustainable transport programs, leading on city-level policy and regulations which are impacting us in the last mile, and developing innovation pilots and sort of scaling those up to BAU. I can't tell you what happened to your package.
That was going to be my first question.
Hit me with anecdotes today, but I really look forward to telling you some of the exciting things that we've been up to.
Brilliant. Thank you, and thank you to all our panellists for being here. Okay, so now I'm going to delve into the topic, which is delivering seamless logistics through technology. And I've got a couple of specific questions that I'm going to target at members of the panel, but then it's going to be over to the audience for questions. So, first of all, I'm going to start with a question for Tom and Farsi. Which innovations are you seeing in the sector? What are technologies like AI and automation doing to change the industry? What are the benefits to the new tech? But also, are there any risks? And I'll go to Farsi first, and then Tom, if you can come in, please.
I think you'll find generally within the maritime sector and ports, we tend to lag behind in terms of technology adoption. So some of the more mainstream technologies that might be quite mature in other industries like AI or automation, I think you'll find the medium-sized and smaller ports, they tend to lag quite far behind in terms of their adoption. Our main focus currently is automation of our land-based operations. So whether it's picking up containers or different cargoes from vessels onto tugs and then transporting them inwards towards land-based warehouses, what we are trying to do is automate elements of those operations. So whether it's looking at remote operations of cranes, whether it's automating tugs that transport containers from cranes to warehouses, or even utilizing our digital systems better, so to integrate data between different warehouse container systems to have that holistic overview as to what's happening within operations. I think that's what the focus is currently, and I think it's most of the ports that are following a very similar scenario. We also have to keep in mind what's driving this. So primarily, I think the biggest challenge we're facing within the industry is getting skilled labor inwards. There's a skills fade that's happening. You'll find that maritime industry and ports, especially in the Northeast, it's a tough job. It's generally quite windy. It's almost raining every day on the quayside. So you don't get a lot of people who are willing to drive around in that sort of weather or to operate cranes. So autonomy is one way we feel we can tackle this challenge. In terms of remote operations, what it's also allowing us to do is to make these jobs more accessible to a wider group of people. If you can drive a crane sitting in an office-based environment, or if you can drive a reach stacker in an office-based environment rather than being out in the field, you open that job up to a lot more people with disabilities, more women in the industry. So that's another challenge that autonomy can help us tackle. Also, autonomous systems tend to be a lot more safer in terms of reducing risk of accidents happening. There's a real chance of injuries happening when you're moving heavy equipment and heavy cargo as well. So it's about removing people from those dangerous environments and making them safer. And finally, obviously, the added benefits that enhance productivity that come along with these solutions as well. Another focus that we're starting to see is the use of AI applications within workforce. Now, obviously, AI can be applied to all sorts of applications. What we're seeing within ports is the use of AI mostly for identification of safety incidents and how can we prevent them. Also, around the automation and seamless transport of container goods, we're using computer vision and machine learning to bring in containers as they get off vessels rather than doing manual inspections, which take up more time going forward. So just a few applications that are helping us drive these innovations forward.
Thanks, Fasi. That's really fascinating. And actually, the thought of being able to operate a crane from, well, essentially your bedroom, maybe that would be quite exciting. So thank you for that. Tom, can you tell us a bit more about the innovations that you're seeing in the sector, please?
Yeah, it's a period of huge change in the last mile space, and a lot of it is being driven by what cities are doing. So Tim touched on it earlier, but we're seeing a lot more restrictions in last mile, so parking restrictions, access restrictions, pedestrian schemes. It was announced last week that Oxford Street is pedestrianising, for example, and that really sort of changes how vans can operate in those urban environments. So as an industry, and I feel like Amazon are leading the way in this, we're having to rethink how we're making those deliveries in urban areas, and we're having to innovate. So, Tim, I was very disappointed in your logistics utopia by the lack of cargo bikes and sort of micromobility vehicles in there, but that's something that we've invested massively in. So, in fact, you may see, I saw two of our bikes when I was walking over at lunchtime today, delivering in Manchester, but in over 70 cities across Europe now, we're delivering, we have walker deliveries, cargo bike deliveries, or e-cargo moped deliveries to try and meet those city challenges. And we announced a couple of weeks ago, we've now hit 100 million packages by those modes across Europe since. So we're really at a position where we are starting to scale that and meet the needs and challenges of cities. When you see the bikes, I think that's like innovation with a capital I. I think some of the really exciting and interesting stuff is sort of the smaller and smarter innovations that go on within that. So we're working very closely with cities in how we're launching and scaling these operations. And We need new infrastructure to do it. You can't magic the bikes and magic the packages into certain areas. So we need spaces where we can launch these operations from. So some of my favourite innovations within that, we've got a great relationship with RATP, who are the public transport operator in Paris. And essentially they've got bus garages in the city centre, which during the day, the buses are out moving people around and the warehouses are empty. So when the buses go out in the morning, we come in with the truck, with the bikes, and we sort of run pop-up hubs in there. So it's a way that RATP can sweat their assets and a way that we can deliver by bike at scale in Paris. In London, for the walker deliveries, we've been using traffic regulation orders, traffic management orders, like how can we get access to the curbside, how can we basically have these mobile depots where we sort of have a fixed location during the day, and then deliveries on foot happen from those, and then the vehicle leaves at the end of the day as well. So we've been working with Westminster, Hackney, Camden, or City as well to sort of scale that too. So it's one of the really exciting innovations that we see.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. That does sound very exciting indeed. I'm going to move to you now, Grace. So I'm interested to hear about your growth strategies. I think with my day job hat on as stakeholder engagement, I'm specifically keen to hear, how do you engage communities more effectively? But also, how can we deliver decarbonisation?
It's a big question,
Yeah.
But one I prepared for, luckily.
Good.
For the Port of London, growth is obviously central to our mission, but it's a growth that's balanced very much with stakeholder and community and sustainability. So we have a vision that we've set for the river and the port that rolls out to 2050, and we have 3 pillars. We have a trading Thames, a natural Thames, and a destination Thames, to really show that those 3 things go hand in hand when we make decisions that impact that river. And I think that they are inextricably linked. And I think that when we talk about growth in the context of London in particular, we're also talking about it in a really constrained way. So London, as I'm sure you all know, does not have a lot of space left. And I think your point about using spaces that aren't being used in the day is a great one. But the river is actually a space left in London. And so how do we use it in a more intelligent way? How do we get more cargo, for example, on the river, moving some of that, the beginning of that last mile delivery into London? And so we've been working really closely looking at how we can enable light freight on the river, how we can maximize the inland waterway element of our work, really to kind of help drive some of that sustainability. But that does also come at a kind of cost for some stakeholders in terms of seeing more activity on the river. And so how do we sell that to our community? How do we sell the fact that this is a cleaner, more sustainable way to move large amounts of cargo into London, and as well kind of demonstrating the air quality impacts that has, demonstrating the reduction in congestion on the roads with our current kind of figures of freight moving in the inland part of the port. We estimate 180,000 lorries are not going into London because of that inland movement. So how do we really sell that story back to those communities? And that's a challenging thing to do, but something that we're really working on. And our vision and having a long-term vision that our stakeholders can understand and get behind is really key to that selling of that story and bringing communities along. But we do find that there are challenges in that space still.
Thanks, Grace. That's good to know. Do you want to elaborate on any of the challenges?
Well, I think that no matter, when you work in a kind of busy stakeholder space, there's always somebody that's not going to be happy with the outcome of your decision. I think you would probably agree with that. And so it's about balancing those views and bringing other views into the conversation as well. But I think that technology and that data-driven decision-making allows the emotion sometimes to be taken out of it. So for example, at the moment we're working with UKPN on a project to look at where best to situate charging infrastructure for our inland freight vessels. And again, that can be really emotive. People don't necessarily want to have power stations near their lovely kind of beautiful balcony that overlooks the river. And so working really closely with those communities to understand what potential benefits that would also bring for them in terms of increased capacity at the site, you know, how traffic would be managed around that, helps to kind of overcome some of those challenges. But ultimately, there will still be somebody who isn't happy about it.
Definitely, yeah. It's always tricky to balance everyone's needs. But yeah, I think you're right. Technology can definitely help because that, if you've got evidence-based decision making, then hopefully that helps to balance people's views. Thank you, Grace. David, I'm going to turn to you now. So my first question I wanted to ask you, David, is how is technology supporting joined-up logistics?
Yeah, so I guess firstly I'd say predictive logistics is helping a number of our members better understand some of the delays that they're facing. So we know as a country that congestion on our road networks costs the UK economy about £30 billion each year. And for every haulier that is stuck in traffic, that is money that they are losing. So predictive logistics, allowing them to change routes mid-journey, allow them to adapt to situations, allow them to escape the worst areas of congestion is something that's been really beneficial. I know it was mentioned earlier today, digital twins. I spoke to an organisation that's done a digital twin of Dover Port. So understanding how you can predict delays, how you can use the model to understand what will happen during periods of disruption, how you can then sort of gameplay how you keep freight moving. And I guess the last area is probably around the sort of operational side. So around about 30% of the HGVs you see on the motorway will be empty running. So you will, as a haulier, you will deliver your load and then you will be returning back to base. So there are innovative platforms that allow hauliers to load their van for another organisation and obviously get money for their trouble, but also, as we know, there's a huge environmental benefit to this. So if even for part of your return journey that you can fill your HGV with goods is good for the economy, it's good for the member. You know, I go back to what I said at the beginning about those 2% margins. If as a haulier you can use a platform to then utilise what you have, so you've got a truck running back to the depot, then it's hugely beneficial to you as a business.
Brilliant, thanks, David. And then the other question I wanted to ask you, and this is, I think, with my Women in Transport hat on, and others might want to come in afterwards. Obviously, freight, logistics, and maritime, well, transport as a whole, you know, in terms of women's representation, the sectors, I think 27% of the workforce are women. In freight, logistics, and maritime, it's about 20%, but in terms of driver roles and seagoing roles, I think we're like sort of 1-3% women. So my question is, what initiatives have you got in place or innovations to tackle this underrepresentation of women?
Yeah, no, the stats are pretty shocking. So we estimate around 2% of the HGV driver community are women. So I think from an industry perspective, there are a number of projects that we're involved in, including through Women in Transport, partly to understand what the barriers are. I think something that organisations really need to think about, particularly those male-dominated businesses that we have in our membership, is how you include the voice of women in how you recruit, in how you train, in how you keep people within your organisation. I guess there are sort of two strands to this. One is that education piece. So we heard earlier about people coming into the transport sector. Actually knowing the types of roles out there is really important. So I would say that the work of Women in Transport is very important. Generation Logistics, which explains some of those roles to young people, including to women, and explains some of the different roles that exist within our industry. Yes, you can drive a HGV, but there's also technician roles, there's transport planning roles, there's lots of different roles that people can be part of. And I guess the second strand to it is the more immediate. So people coming into the industry, so aren't necessarily young, maybe mid-career people. One of the issues we've seen is around facilities. So it's a big issue for our membership that as a company, you say to your drivers, right, I want you to go on this job. I don't know if you can shower when you've got your breaks. I don't know when you can take your breaks. I don't know whether you'll get a healthy meal. I don't know about toilet facilities. It's a hard conversation that many of our businesses have to have with their members and their employees. And this is doubly hard for female drivers. So we know that facilities are poor for men. They're even worse for women. And I spoke to Tesco a few weeks ago. They are really trying to recruit female drivers. And one of the issues that they faced is the state of facilities along the road network. So we as an organisation, we as the RHA, are really pushing government to have better facilities, better investment, making sure that when we plan infrastructure, we think about the parking facilities, we think about the secure parking facilities that we have. So I think there are two elements to it. One is around getting young people into the industry, but also getting those career changes in as well. And I think we need to do more as an industry, as I say, around facilities and the welfare of our drivers.
Thanks, David. That's really good to know. And the facilities point, that has come up a lot for us at Women in Transport. And we did some work with the all-party parliamentary group for Women in Transport looking at that. And that was the thing that came up time and time again. So, yeah, I'm glad to hear that it's something you're looking at as well. Would any of our other panellists like to come in on the diversity and inclusion point and what we can do to get more women into the sector?
I think before I start, the irony isn't lost on me as a sort of balding white man with a beard about to talk about how important diversity is while sitting on a logistics panel. But we do some, it's not just like the operational side, I think there's also in the managerial space as well. There's much more that needs to be done. Within Amazon, we've got an excellent women leadership program, which also has a huge male allyship aspect to it. There's sort of a train the trainer, and it's sort of led by those sort of young managerial bands within Amazon, and there's been some really fantastic results from that. But I think as much as our businesses and our companies doing it, it's down to us as individuals to make sure that we are pulling in as many perspectives. Someone earlier said diversity of perspectives. I really enjoyed that phrase. I think that's something that we need to be really cognizant of and proactive with when we're choosing who to go on panels, like what voices are we getting in on a programme or something that's coming forward. So, yeah, much more to be done.
Brilliant. Thank you. Grace?
Yeah, to say at the Port of London, we're very lucky in that actually in our senior leadership, we have a lot of women. We don't have as many women in the kind of more junior roles, and certainly the roles that are afloat. And we have been doing some work around that in kind of small ways. For example, we've supported, there's a scheme called the Scarlet Box, which is just actually about providing, period support for people who are afloat. So just a box that has some tampons in it, and that's actually really important for staff who are afloat. But in terms of the kind of the wider sector, I don't think we are marketing ourselves particularly well. I don't come from a maritime background. I come from building sustainability. When I arrived in the sector, I guess they kind of took a bit of a chance on me, actually, at a senior level. And so I think there's an element of hiring smart women. Let's just hire them. They don't necessarily need to come from the sector, and bring that diversity of thought in. And I think that probably is the kind of the easiest way to start that. But what I discovered when I arrived here is it's absolutely fascinating. And I don't think that people recognize that. Certainly at the beginning parts of their career, we heard some fantastic panelists in the session beforehand talking about how excited they were about the maritime sector, but about the transport sector. But I don't necessarily see many of those young people getting excited. So I think more marketing of who we are, more marketing of the kind of roles and opportunities. You're right, there's such a breadth just in the port industry as it stands alone. You can be you can work on a hydrography team. You can work in an environment team like myself. You can work in a planning team. You know, there's all kinds of opportunities that aren't the traditional maritime opportunities that we think of. So I think better marketing of the sector is really important.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And again, something that we see come up quite a lot of women in transport, just in terms of, you know, inspiring the next generation. And do people know that actually pretty much any job you can think of, you can do in freight, logistics, maritime, the wider transport sector, but it's just not, it's not communicated well enough. So yes, I guess as a comms professional, I probably would say that. But yeah, marketing, 100% agree. Farsi, was there anything you wanted to add on the diversity point before we go over to questions from the audience?
I think it's more about targeting the early schoolgoers. I think by the time people get to university, I think it's a bit too late in terms of attracting them to maritime. I mean, it's been mentioned before, it's kind of repeating myself, but there are a lot more jobs in maritime than just being a tug driver or a crane operator. You've got event planners, you've got marketing, you've got innovation teams, you've got project management. So there's a whole industry around maritime that can support a lot of different careers. I think we just need to highlight that, especially in schools. We've got a new job opening at the port as a drone operator, which wasn't previously a thing. It's something, if people are interested in technology, that they can certainly join as well. So I think it's a great point about marketing ourselves and the type of jobs that are available now, but also that are going to be available in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, very important point, the role of technology in opening up jobs to a wider audience. And I guess that's part of what we're here to talk about today. Okay, right, I'm going to open up to the floor and see if anyone in the audience has any questions. Yeah, we've got a roving mic, so if the mic could go to the gentleman at the back with the grey jumper, or the lady, that's fine. You can go first. If you say your name and your organisation, please.
Of course. Hi, I'm Jen Stanley. I'm actually from Amazon Web Services, so I work very closely with Tom, but we're also a cloud partner to lots of public sector transport organisations. And obviously, I have the pleasure of seeing them innovate, but I know that they find it difficult at times. So I kind of was interested to hear the perspectives from the panel on how you do it, how you innovate in transport, whether that's digitally, whether it's kind of on the road, introducing new technologies. Any lessons you have?
Thank you. Who would like to come in on that?
I can go first, I think.
Thanks, Farsi.
So there are different ways we do that. I think our flagship program is what we call Venture Connect. It's a 6-month program where it's open for all SMEs that are innovating within the maritime sector, or for established companies that want to move into the maritime sector. So we help them develop the correct value proposition, introduce them to investors who are investing in new startups, but also we provide them with mentors from across the maritime sector, not just within the port. So these could be people from supply chains, from the automotive industry, from shipping lines, who help them basically develop their business case and what they're trying to sell, basically. So also, we act as a live test bed. So if there are any startups that want operational environment to test their technologies, we're very happy to collaborate with them in terms of providing them operational guidance or that infrastructure that they can use to test their technologies as well. We've got a network of partners like BT and Ericsson who are also quite open in terms of innovation. So it's about making those connections with the wider maritime innovation ecosystem so that they can build those connections and take those conversations forward as well.
Thanks. And David, you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, so from a road haulage perspective, 85% of the companies that operate on the network are SMEs. So there is a challenge when it comes to adopting new technologies. One of the things that I did mention was around that sort of operational tool where companies can use a freight platform to then fill their HGV when it returns back to the depot. So there are instances where small companies have been working with innovative either AI companies or small startups. So I think when we look at innovation in the road transport sector, it's probably those types of relationships. Now, there are large operators who can perhaps do change at scale, like obviously like Amazon, like Royal Mail, who can bring in changes perhaps at a quicker pace. But I would say at the other end of the market, there is that challenge and there is that gap between some of the tools that they would like and eventual adoption. And that cuts across many issues, including decarbonisation as well.
Thanks. Grace or Tom, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just very briefly, just to say that we see a very similar thing on the river as well in terms of SMEs, certainly inland vessel operators. And we're very much reliant, if I'm honest, on government funding cycles through Innovate UK to really test out some of those potential projects and those potential innovations on the river in a slightly de-risked way, because you can get some of that capital up front. And we also, as the Port Authority, do a lot of work to understand what it is that holds innovation back on the river. And try and procure some of those tools or answer some of those questions on behalf of the whole river ecosystem and at a strategic level to start to reduce some of those barriers that the SMEs definitely feel to innovation. Excuse me.
Thanks. Tom?
So David's absolutely right that it's easier for an Amazon to make changes or try and innovate than a smaller operator, but change is still incredibly hard to deliver. From my experience of leading innovation pilots, I think the critical path for success is you've got to take everyone on the journey with you from the start. You've got to identify who is going to be impacted and get them in the room straight away. You have to pilot, and you have to pilot clearly with what's the scale. Are we learning everything we need to learn to get to that scale with this? And you've got to have that constant flexibility to course correct as you go. We talk in Amazon about one-way doors and two-way door decisions. We don't like to go through one-way doors. We like to go through two-way doors that we can come back through as well. I've gone through a lot of two-way doors and come back through with things that we've been testing. You've got to leave yourself that space to fail. And you've got to accept that you may fail as part of your innovation as well, and that's fine. Because if everyone stood behind it and said, yes, we want to go and do this, yes, we want to learn from this, and it doesn't work, you take those learnings to whatever you do afterwards.
Brilliant, thank you. And then the next question over here.
Hi there, Tom Burgess-Langhout from PA Consulting. Interesting conversation, and Grace, you kind of touched on it a little bit with the Innovate UK kind of funding piece, but it kind of builds on that question of, we're talking 2% margin businesses up against it from trying to deliver on a day-to-day. And most of these organisations are then having to face kind of not quite existential, but almost existential crisis and positioning of big capital investments that potentially are needed. So if you look at electrifying a fleet, cost of an electric HGV versus a standard HGV is significantly higher. What are your views on where that money should come from in the upfront versus the kind of long-term return, and kind of what the balance of government funding and avoiding being reliant on subsidy forever is? Because I think that's a real challenge we've seen with HGV conversations in particular, but I imagine it applies in ports and other settings as well.
Okay, so the balance of government funding versus other. I'm just going to take this question here as well, and then hopefully we can answer both of them, because that's probably all we're going to have time for.
Thank you, Alan Mocker from Sisolek. I think in Tim's keynote there was one of the sort of the contrast between that sort of nightmare nighttime and the utopian daytime was around digital integration. I think that was probably one of the biggest pieces, and for me the fuel for digital integration is data, whether it's data in advance to drive planning and decision making, or whether it's real-time data for sort of predictive, you mentioned, David, sort of predictive logistics and the likes. But I would imagine you guys, your members or your organizations, you're quite good at the data that you have internally. Question is, for supply chains, it's about data sharing. And we've got really fragmented sort of marketplace and data tools that are out there. Think of transport management systems. There's probably about 100 different transport management system platforms in Europe. So what do you think is going to push us to a more data sharing in our supply chains position so that we can get somewhere towards this interoperable sort of seamless logistics supply chains that you guys are kind of alluding towards.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's take the one on improved data sharing first, and then we can go to the balance of government funding. So who would like to talk about data sharing and how we can make it better?
I can put my 2 cents in. I think it is a massive challenge, that overall data picture that tells you where your cargo is. I think even within ports, I tend to think of ports as a collection of multiple businesses. So you've got warehousing, you've got containers, you've got logistics and freight itself. So these different domains don't share data between themselves, much less over the wider supply chain either. So it is a massive challenge. I think traditionally there hasn't been much impetus in terms of solving this because the downstream supply chain, our customers or partners, weren't really that interested in this. I think what we've seen over the past 6 months, over the past year, is renewed focus on this element of data sharing where our customers want to know where their cargo is, and that's driving improvements in terms of how we share data. We are piloting a project right now with AWS for a specific customer of ours in terms of improved data sharing as to where a vessel is, where their containers are, and when can they expect that container to arrive at the warehouse for improved forecasting. So again, it's early days, but I think it is a huge challenge within the industry. You'll tend to find that because ports sit between the between the hauliers and the shipping lines, we tend to suffer from both ends because the hauliers won't share their data with us, nor with the shipping lines. So we're kind of in a blind spot and trying to manage expectations from both sides. But things are improving. I think you'll find with the bigger shipping lines, they are starting to introduce their APIs, which do have a cost, but you can start developing solutions around them to provide that. We'd like to call it a data highway picture where everyone can log in and see where everything is. Yep.
Thanks, Vasi. And then who would like to take the one on the balance of investment and what should come from government?
Happy to
Yeah.
start with that one. You're right about the cost of electric HGVs and vans versus diesel. So that is a consideration for hauliers and members of ours. What they are really looking for is certainty. So there aren't enough HGV charging points across the UK for electric HGVs. There aren't enough charging points for large vans. Interestingly enough, we have a simulator van as the RHA. And there's a social media post from a couple of weeks ago where it was taking up two bays to actually charge. Which is a really good example of the day-to-day challenges that you have as a van owner of an electric van. So yes, there's need for more investment, and I think there is the need to bridge that gap. So I think the government does need to support the rollout of new technology if we are to progress. So I think in the short term, yes, there needs to be that government investment, but more importantly, there needs to be that certainty around the infrastructure, which there isn't at the moment.
Thanks. Grace, was there anything you'd like to come on either of those questions?
Yeah, I definitely echo your thoughts that I think that the government does need to provide funding into the sector. And I think that the request probably that we're seeing more of now is not so much funding for the innovation, because actually in the maritime sector, if we're talking about electrification, we're well down the route of innovation on electrification. We have electric vessels operating on the river already. So it's more about scaling. So how do we scale that in a big way, and how do we have the funding to help us scale that? And it's quite an interesting one in terms of funding from the government and government funding cycles and how that impacts upon decisions that are made. If we look at something, for example, like alternative fuels, interestingly, the capital is not normally the problem. Sometimes around kind of retrofitting a vessel, for example. But now that we're getting more dual fuel vessels coming into operation, where the investment needs to come from government is actually around the OPEX. And the OPEX doesn't look good on alternative fuels for a good 10 years. So how do you kind of support those medium-term business cases in a government cycle, which is very short-term.
Thank you. And finally, Tom, was there anything that you wanted to come in on either of those?
On the HGV piece, I'm much more based on last mile, so I have less visibility into the trucking space. But I really agreed with what you said there, David. I think even if government aren't going to be funding the charging infrastructure, I think they have a central role as a convener to understand what does the industry need and where does the industry need it, and then the funding question sort of will follow from there, because that's a prerequisite for any electrification of the middle mile space. On the data point, so my background, I used to work for Transport for London and in local government in London working on logistics topics, and I found it absolutely maddening that there was no data available and the industry was unwilling to share data. I would say we're getting better at it now, especially where we're working with like commercial partners in cities. I think we're finding ways, because it's always been that it's commercially sensitive point, and there's sort of a blanket coverage to it. So we're finding ways of being able to share data in the right circumstances. I think if you've got anything in mind specifically, just come and see me afterwards. I'll be happy to talk to you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, thank you to the audience for your engagement with this session. Thank you to our expert panel talking about delivering seamless logistics through technology. So, yeah, if you could all help me thank the panel in the usual way, please.